Welcome into another episode of Home Field Advantage. Hope you're all having a great week or weekend whenever you're watching or listening to us. Special episode today. My name is Will Highland, but more importantly, I'm joined by good friend Josh Ricker. He's our resident soccer expert here at Home Field Advantage. If you've listened to us before, you know this to be true. Super excited to have Josh on the program today. Josh, how's it going this evening?
It's going great. And thanks for having me on. It's always a pleasure to kind of link back up and see where you're at, not only in your soccer journey, but where Tottenham's at as well. So I'm
Yeah,
excited. It's been a good start to the Prem season.
it has been. It has been. And one thing that's super helpful, and you mentioned it, the soccer journey, is the main stand. So I'd
Yeah.
encourage you all, even if I'd say I'm no longer in my infancy of being a soccer fan. I'd probably say I'm a toddler or an elementary schooler. But no matter where you are in your journey, definitely listen to Josh's podcast. We'll plug it again at the end, but
Yep.
it's an amazing listen if you're new to the game, because you guys break it down in a way that I think um, is helpful for young fans
Sure.
of wherever they are. You don't have to be an expert in order to listen to the main stand. So I appreciate that. But I think this has also become a little bit of a tradition, Josh, where have you on once a year, once or twice a year. Usually it happens to be around what I think you've correctly said in the past is your favorite Premier League fixture. And so that's where we're at, Tottenham and Liverpool,
Yeah.
squaring off in North London on Saturday at 12:30 Eastern time. I know you'll be watching. I'll
Yeah.
try and watch. I think it's hard because I don't have Peacock. It's on
Sure.
USA or is it on Peacock?
That's a great question. I always check a little bit closer to the match, but I know nowadays it's only like, I think one match maybe a day on USA. The rest
Yeah.
are on Peacock. So it's a hit or miss.
Yeah, and I'm not going to incriminate myself by explaining how I watch other ways, but that's a story for another day.
Yeah.
All right, so we're talking about the Premier League. No matter how you're able to watch, if you do have Peacock, good for you. Otherwise, no matter how you watch, it's been an interesting season at the outset. And you've been on the show before. You know that I usually like to start with sort of a leading opening question. And in this case, my leading opening question is, what's the biggest surprise? I mean, this table looks a little weird, looks a little bit different than what you and Mitch and Pat may have predicted, but it's still wicked early. So what are you seeing on this table at the beginning of the season through five
Yeah,
matches?
I tell you what, there's a lot of really, really good ones, and it's tough when we're this early because a lot of teams still have plenty of time to normalize themselves, and I think we're already seeing that with a couple teams. But I'll go ahead and just give my quick one, and it's probably Newcastle. And I say this as a bit ironic because they won 8-0 this weekend against Sheffield United.
Yeah, that was nuts.
Yeah, I think Newcastle just been a little bit underwhelming for me. They went out and added a few good pieces again to a lineup they've, added to consistently over the past year since the takeover. The likes of Harvey Barnes joining, Sandro Tonali from AC Milan. And I think a lot of people just had really, really high expectations for them. Not saying they didn't have a difficult start to the year. I think playing Man City in Manchester and Liverpool is always going to be a tough ask for, a team like Newcastle. But with the expectations, it just felt a little falling flat. We saw them in the Champions League as well. They left that one 0-0 to AC Milan. I guess they did win tonight against Man City, and again in a different competition. But
Right.
I just want to see a little bit something more from Newcastle to start out the season the way they did. I think they were 1-0-3 in their first four. They bounced back a little bit from that, but I just expected them to kind of go out of the races strong and haven't quite saw it yet.
Yeah, so I had Newcastle as mine, but for the sake of not being too repetitive, because I agree. I mean, losing three in a row was like shocking.
Yeah.
Considering obviously they can score the way that they beat up on their opponent over the weekend.
Yeah.
But the other surprise to me is Chelsea, and it's not that like they're very much tumultuous. right now.
Mhm.
With the way that everything's gone, change of ownership last year, the year before, whenever that was, huge expectations, ranging expectations, legal problems the past few years. It just seems like they're now the most dysfunctional club in London, thankfully. It used to be us with, Conte yelling at the media
Yeah.
and our football director ending up with sanctions or whatever the correct term is. But I think Chelsea right now not getting points. I think only getting 1 point out of 9 in the last 3 matches.
Yeah.
I just think I would have expected them at the very least to be top 10. The fact that they're at this point, I just checked, the fact that they're all the way down at 14 with a negative goal differential is just different to
Yeah.
me. And I think, Fulham having the worst goal differential I see in London, but Chelsea having only, how many points is that? 5? Only
5.
5 points through 6 matches. I mean, that's crazy. And that, to them, that's not a standard that they're used to. I mean, they're used to being in top 6 at least, top 5, top 4. So that's a big surprise to me. Maybe not to you, being a veteran Premier League watcher
Sure.
and seeing what kind of roster they built versus the expectations they had. But just seemed like even amidst everything, Chelsea usually finds a way to at least win games that they shouldn't always win. But they
Yeah,
had
I tell you what, it kind of goes along with the saying that just sort of, throwing money at a wall doesn't always, mean it'll land. And we're starting to see that with just like some of the players they bought. Nico Jackson looked good in the preseason. He hasn't really panned out so far in the regular season. They just have so much money all over the field. They've had injuries. Moises Caicedo and Romeo Lavia haven't got much game time at all. No, I mean, I think they spent 170 million American dollars on those two players alone. You're talking about guys like Mykhailo Mudryk, who they tossed a lot of money on earlier last year. Just a team of misfit toys who looks like, they haven't met each other before. I honestly, and I kind of agree with you here, Will, because I would have thought that Mauricio Pochettino would have had more of an impact.
Yeah.
Even this early. We're 6 games into the season. I know Poch is more of like a project guy, but you still think he would have had some discernible impact on this team, within his first couple months in charge.
Right, and I forgot, or neglected, I should say, to even bring up Poch. I mean, and I should know that as well, considering there was a lot of talk in the offseason about him coming back and what that would have meant. But also pointing out the resources is a very like pertinent way of looking at it, because a team like that, even if they're dealing with injuries, you would usually expect them to somehow patch the holes enough and have a deep enough roster to be able to, or squad, I should say, to even be able to withstand some of that, especially early on. And I forget who they've played. I think in the opening weekend, whoever they played in the opening weekend, I watched that game. I remember it being really competitive, but I sort of forget nowadays. They
played Liverpool on opening
okay,
weekend.
so yeah, that was like 6 weeks ago now, but I remember that being a competitive, interesting game and thinking, okay, maybe they'll be all right. But
yeah, they've lost to some pretty tough teams. I mean, Villa's had a good year, but they lost to Villa this past weekend. They've lost to some pretty tough teams.
Yeah, I just would have expected that. And then Man United looks a little lost, but they usually find their way some way or another. That game that Spurs beat them in was an electric game. That was since watching, I hadn't seen the home stadium that loud and on TV in a few years. And definitely, I think in the post Kane era, if this turns out trending in a positive way, you'll look back at that as kind of a turning point. Because I mean, drawing with Southampton, and I think in the first or no, it was Brentford. Drawing with Brentford, another red team. Drawing with Brentford in the first match was kind of like, okay, whatever, we're off to the start here. But then beating United at home, I think, changed the tide. But not to make it a Spurs thing, but it is. I mean, it is. I would like, because in the past you would look at that United team and be like, oh, that's a juggernaut coming in here. We're gonna
for what it's worth too. Like for the sake of the conversation, I think Tottenham are a surprise too. Maybe not the biggest one, but they are for sure a surprise just from where they were last season. I think when you're looking at, Ange coming in, he seems like a project guy too, someone who's found, success a little bit later on in his managerial career. And it looks like the investments they've made, while not glamorous before the season, looks like they're really panning out and they're kind of maybe building something special. So
I think so too. And yeah, that you make a great point. Because I was trying to be objective, I didn't even think about this, but it was a surprise to me, right? Not just the Man United game, but the fact that they were like winning games, like down late against Sheffield. That in the past, that was an immediate chalk it in. Like since I've been watching, at least that was immediate chalk it in. That's a loss.
Yeah.
And as clutch as they had been late in games the past few years, you could always kind of rely on number 10 to get things going, right? And and that's not there. So you're right. It is a little bit of a surprise considering the Kane thing happened right at the end of the preseason, and Ange Postecoglou is sort of a interesting guy. Like he seems like a rally the troops kind of guy, but he also seems really reserved, and so he's sort of like Pochettino in that respect. But I am surprised. I thought for sure like we would lose to Arsenal.
Oh yeah, and I think
mean,
Sonny's kind of turning the corner into another good season, which is always good for you guys. But if you said at the beginning of the season, like before Kane left, that you weren't going to have Kane, and you're going to have guys like the Udogie guy, Van de Ven, Vicario, getting like serious minutes for this team, and then you would also be in fourth place in the position you're in points wise. I think a lot of Spurs fans would have even been surprised by that.
Oh yeah, for sure. And there were some guys that were sort of on the periphery with Conte, that like weren't really sure what their role was gonna be. Like Pedro Porro was supposed to be. It was really dramatic signing at the end of the January window, where it was like, is he gonna be here? Is he not gonna be here? They get it done at the 11th hour. He shows up. He has a big goal, I think, at one of the last games against Leeds or something. But then you were kind of like, okay, well, I don't know how Ange is gonna work this guy in. He's been really, really good. And then also, you mentioned Udogie, who took care of Arsenal. I mean, when he got booked for yellow, I know you were probably watching the Liverpool game, but I'm like, oh God, here we go. Like this is gonna be bad. And he ran where Christian Romero walked. You know what I mean? Like that was sort of how that game went. And then the other guy who I'd mentioned, who I didn't have a ton of expectations for, who has been a surprise, sort of in a microcosm way, was Pape Sarr.
That's true too. That's a great
goal. That goal he had going back to the United game was I think, if this season turns into something where they qualify for a European competition or whatever, we're months away from that being a real conversation. But if it does head that way, I look back at that game and probably that goal as being like a turning point in the belief factor, because I think one of the things that Tottenham lacked was a belief. Like a belief of anything, really, a mission of some kind. So anyway, I think that wraps up. I guess the long story short is there's been a lot of surprises.
Exactly.
I think but one thing that's to me not surprising is that Liverpool is right back where they are at the top of the table. I know last year was slightly disappointing, relatively speaking, especially the slow start. I know we talked about that a year ago or 9 months ago, whenever it was. But what has been a difference in the start this year versus last for Liverpool?
A lot of things. The one thing that you can point to is the midfield rebuild that Klopp has done. It's sort of his, he's even named it his Liverpool 2.0 project. We had a solid 8 years where Henderson and Milner, were getting a lot of the minutes in midfield. The past 5 years, Fabinho, Oxlade-Chamberlain, Naby Keita, all those guys left this summer. So there's a huge opportunity for minutes. We had guys like, Dominic Szoboszlai came in, who scored a belter of a goal tonight in the Carabao Cup. Alexis McAllister from Brighton, Wataru Endo, Ryan Gravenberch from Bayern Munich. A lot of really smart signings. It just feels like they've kind of like energized the team a little bit. It's let guys, like Harvey Elliott, get minutes kind of where he should, more up top. Even offensively, we're looking at like a fully healthy Liverpool front line. Darwin Nunez is playing a little bit better than it seemed like he was last year. Yeah, scored some big goals already. And I think Mo Salah too. People had like doubts about him a little bit last year. I think what he's done this year in his first 8 games of the season has been nothing short of spectacular. I think he already has 4 goals and 5 assists or something like that through 8 games. He's unplayable. It's a lot of just like, and I don't want to just simplify it too much, but we're just playing better football. When you come into games and you're always conceding first, which is something we're also doing right now. But after a while, when you're doing that and your midfield is old and tired, it just becomes impossible to win games. Right now, even though we're still conceding, we just have a midfield that kind of like oozes creativity and that will to win. And it feels like kind of the Liverpool fans are believing a little bit too. I think that kind of weighs into it a little bit. So a lot of factors are at play, but it feels like a positive movement. We saw it a couple years ago too. The year where Alisson headed in the goal to get us in top 4. We were really bad. Next year, we go on to play every single game possible, go to the final of every competition, and lose to City in the league on the final day. It was a great season. So I'm hoping it's that kind of same response.
Yeah, that was an amazing season. And I mean, and just again, I was watching Spurs and Arsenal, obviously, but seeing after the fact, like that West Ham game was to me just sort of like the bread and butter of like what you're used to seeing, which is, score a bunch of goals, Salah scores first. In fact, the announcer was giving a score update and he said none other, right, than Mo Salah scoring the first goal. Like it just seemed like a classic Liverpool game, like that you would have seen in that 2021-22 season. But since you brought it up, I will point out, and this was a good segue again, that maybe the reason you didn't win the league that year is because Spurs took a point and both took a point, took 2 points off in both of those matches that year. So I'm not saying that's going to happen on Saturday, but I mean, I think, especially during the time I've watched, and you can go back to May 1st or April 30th, the most recent one, to see that these games are always close. And there was a long string of time there. I think in 2017, there was a 4-1 win. And then I think there were, was it 8 or 9 in a row of
I know the stat off the top of my head. In their last 12, Liverpool's 9-3-0 against Tottenham.
9-3-0. All right.
Since
and I believe one of the draws was in the 2018 season. And then I think the second draw was, or then the other 2 were that year, that 21-22 year.
2018, I remember distinctly because Mo Salah scored a last-minute goal, and then Eric Lamela won a penalty. Spurs ended up tying that one, and you're right. The other 2 were a couple years ago.
So these games are, but even the scores during that string of wins, like the last one, for example. I mean, just use recency bias here. I mean, you get down 3-0, you come back. Tottenham had nothing to play for. They, it was a ridiculous game. And then I actually got my heart broken twice that day because in the morning. Spurs battled back, tied the game, then gave up the lead. Richarlison did what you never do, which is celebrate a draw, because then all that does. Yeah. I was worried when Son did it on Saturday. I'm like, oh God, you're celebrating a draw. Don't, because now you're going to concede another goal. And then later that night, the Bruins lost their game, so that was a fun day. But all kidding aside, like obviously the 2 clubs are in completely different stratospheres. Honestly, at this point, like Tottenham is just trying to build a new future, a stronger future, a more stable future. Meanwhile, Liverpool is trying to get back to what they're good at, which is going out there, competing in all competitions, winning a trophy or 2, having the best manager in the world, probably one of the best offensive players in the world. Like, that's just what they do. But that said, what do you think we should expect on Saturday, just as maybe pretend we're neutral fans?
Yeah. Like you said, these games are always dramatic. I think drama is the word that I would slap a label right on this game is drama. There's always a last minute winner. foul. I can just think back of all the times we played Tottenham. Champions League final. There was a comeback win when NBC Sports did the Fan Fest in Boston. That was a comeback that day. When I was at Anfield, it was a comeback. There's always some form of one team takes the lead and the other, takes it back. I wouldn't be surprised if it happens again. One thing we know about this Liverpool team is they concede first a lot, and they're also, from last year, not great on the road. And Tottenham do have, I would consider their new stadium to be electric in terms of atmosphere on the right day. So it wouldn't surprise me if Tottenham come out, score an early goal, and Liverpool can kind of claw back maybe. I do kind of like Liverpool in this game. I just think, to be unbeaten so far, no one's toppled them. Tottenham have looked vulnerable a little bit. We saw in those early games. And I think Liverpool are a little bit stronger than like Man United. Arsenal was a good test and you guys played hard, but at the same time, you can't really take too much account into a derby because it's a different game.
Right. There's so much emotion there.
Yeah. It's honestly really tough to call though, because both teams are playing really well. When you have a guy like James Maddison on the form he's on too, he can pick a pass from anywhere, and Liverpool's defense is more than apt to concede. I'm not, naive enough to not conclude that. Son's on form as well, so you have a lot of points of threat, I would say, but we do as well. I think it's going to be a really open game. Klopp and Ange are going to go at each other. They're not going to try to outwit each other. I don't think they're going to go out there and play hard football. Like the last one too, another expectation I have is this one being pretty high scoring. I wouldn't say it's going to be a defensive affair.
Agreed. I could see it being like 3-2, 4-3. I don't think anyone will score more than 4. Just because I just do trust the backfield and the defense enough on both sides. I was thinking I wanted to look it up. So Tottenham tied with Brentford, not Southampton. Will, I don't know where that came from in my brain. I think they tied with Southampton it might have been Conte's last game. That might have been where that was coming from. But then they really haven't dominated. Even that Man United game that I point to, I don't really know if they dominated that game. The only game they've really dominated was against Burnley, and Burnley's sucks.
Yeah, trash.
So, you know what I mean? So every game that they've played in has been close, and so you're right to say that they're vulnerable. And, I mean, the first 25 minutes of that Arsenal game was, they were lucky they weren't down 2-0 in the first 15, 25 minutes. That was how clinical Arsenal's press was. It's undescribable. And so I think Liverpool is capable of doing that and more, for sure, if they want to play like that. I know that what you said about Maddison is true, and I think he's been the X factor. I think if they didn't have the Maddison signing, as much as I love Son, they needed like another guy. They've been like a two-headed team for a while with Son and Kane, and then they had Gareth Bale for a little while and whatnot, but like they've kind of had like two guys that are sort of leading the team, and Richarlison's just not that guy. So he's just not that guy. Whatever. No. I know, you have opinions on him, but he's just not that guy. So I think that's a positive. But the problem with Maddison now is, I don't know if you noticed, but if you heard this, but he had a pretty like weird looking injury at the end.
I forgot about that. At
the end of that game, like as an American sports fan who's seen guys tear their ACLs all the time, that looked like what it was, like when you see someone's knee buckle. However, he went out and played and then was subbed out. And I think ultimately that might have cost Spurs a chance to win the game, because the momentum was completely in their favor. And then I wouldn't have been surprised if he was included in another goal, but I'd be just anxious to see what his health looks like. And that could have an impact on the outcome. If he's not 100%, it's going to be really hard to take points off Liverpool if your like second or third best player is not 100%. And also Romero was, he was horrible against Arsenal. He was just horrible. He had a handball, and then he had an own goal, and then I think he had a yellow possibly. So it was ridiculous. So if he doesn't play to form, then I don't know how they're gonna keep Liverpool from scoring 3 or 4. I don't know. I don't even think they could, even if he was on form. But
I tell you what, it's going to be a great game for Darwin Nunez to just throw him in. He's like a hornet. Like if you put a hornet in a jar and shake it up against Tottenham, that is the best game for him to just cause havoc in a team that's like still trying to find themselves a little bit.
Yeah. So you would say like a 4-3 Liverpool win or a 4-2 Liverpool win?
And this is my definition of heavy scoring. I'd probably go 3-1. I think the last like 5 Liverpool games have been 3-1 scores too. So
yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I would be surprised if it was like 0-0 or 1-1 even in the second half.
Yeah.
I think there will be, I don't know if this is a bet you probably can make. I think first half goals, I would say like 2.5, and I'd take the over.
I agree with that.
It's first half goals, because it's not going to be one of those, like, I don't think there's going to be a lot of late goals like there was in May, because one thing that sort of happened to both teams is the game has sort of like slowed down a little bit in like that middle quarter, if you know what I mean, like like between the 45-minute mark and like the 75-minute mark, the game sort of is at a stasis. I would expect to see that with maybe some late fireworks. I'd probably say Liverpool 3, Tottenham 2.
Yeah, it's gonna be a good one though.
Yeah. But all right, one thing, we got to address the elephant in the room. We were talking about Tottenham. I brought it up in passing a few times. I don't think we've talked since Harry Kane was sold to Bayern Munich. It's sort of a 2-part question. I'm sorry I didn't prep you for this. But
you're good.
What do you think the impact? We'll talk about the Tottenham impact in a second, because that's more obvious. But the what do you think the impact is on the Premier League losing a star like that? What do you think the impact is on Bundesliga getting a guy like that?
Okay, great for the Bundesliga, because they have a profound goal scorer that can kind of replace a Robert Lewandowski shaped hole that they've been missing for a couple years, both the Bundesliga and Bayern Munich specifically. Great for them, not good for the Premier League. Whenever you lose a top Englishman to another foreign club, you think of like Michael Owen going to like Real Madrid way back in the day, Jude Bellingham going to Real Madrid now. I mean, anytime you lose a top country guy to another league, it's never a good look, because you could have one of the best players in the world playing in your league. But with Daniel Levy as the owner, he was never going to sell to a Man United. I don't think that was ever a serious, even conversation that was had. So that's kind of like on him a little bit. I tell you what, though, it's great for Harry Kane. I think he was just a wonderful servant to Tottenham. And after a while, you kind of have to be selfish. And I think Mourinho had this conversation that was in the Amazon documentary.
Yes, it was.
Like why aren't you, he listed all the top strikers there are. But like, what do we need to get you to that spot? And I think just making that move finally, not to say he wouldn't have won anything with Tottenham ever, but I think making it while he's still in, even the end of his prime, it's just a really good move for him. And he's going to win a lot of trophies, I think, at Bayern.
I used to joke that he'd win a Super Bowl as an NFL kicker before he'd win a trophy with Spurs, but he's talked about that in the past. I agree. It was sort of a foregone conclusion that he was going to leave, and that as you pointed out correctly, it's a loss for the Premier League. It's sort of weird when they were playing in their their international competition to like watch him again, and that was a little weird. And I've seen, he's very active on social media, so even seeing him in another shirt, I flipped that one behind me, flipped it around, and 9% inflation, I'm not going to go buy another one yet. But I think that for Harry, it was certainly something that, as you pointed out, great for him. Can't really hold it against him either. And as you pointed out too, Levy was never going to sell within the country. And I think like the one thing people kept falling back on with Kane was, in regard to the Premier League, was, he might want to stay so he can break the record. I mean, honestly, like at his he doesn't seem like the kind of guy that's really interested in that stuff. Um, as like whenever they would ask him about it, he'd always sort of like give obviously the company line, the humble answer, but it also obviously just felt like he just wasn't really into that. Like that wasn't why he played. I think he played to win, but
Yeah.
he also didn't really communicate that. He was sort of like a weird superstar. And I had a buddy who was on the podcast with us over the summer who's a Man United fan, and he was like kind of on pins and needles for a little bit, hoping that Kane would come over. And I think he made the point, and we agreed on the point that he's like not really good at being a football celebrity.
Yeah,
You know, he's
that's
just
true.
like he's signing endorsement deals with Skechers. You know what I mean? Like he's just, and so I think what he really wants more than anything is just to win a trophy at this point.
Oh yeah, that's
And
definitely what it is.
that's where he's gonna go. And look, they're gonna go and they're gonna be right there every year, winning a domestic trophy every year, no matter what.
And to squash the thing about the Premier League goal scoring record, to think he cares about a record that they just made up. I mean, Alan Shearer can hold on to that as much as he wants to, but the fact that they just like made like the thing of like, oh yeah, records are only going to exist for the last 28 years, not like the Premier League has actually existed for like 130. I
Yeah,
mean, Harry Kane's not that daft to hold that as like a great achievement.
no, no, and he's not. And look, Alan Shearer's awesome, and what he did in the league was great. And obviously, what I forget, I'm a bad Spurs fan, but the guy who broke the record with at
Yeah.
Tottenham, like, I mean, Tottenham just celebrated their like 180 something birthday or something like that the other
Mm-hmm.
day, 150 something, I forget what it is, but um,
Yeah.
that's not really why he plays football. It's just not why. So
Mm-hmm.
that wasn't surprising to me. Really, that wasn't a factor. And look, it's also not a factor because he's just turned 30. He could play in Bayern for like 4 or 5 years, win a few trophies, and then I honestly wouldn't be surprised if he somehow ends up getting sold back to England, but to somebody else. Or
Yeah.
if
That's true.
Spurs buy him back. I mean, Levy has left that door open and talked
Yeah.
about it multiple times. So I would not be surprised if he does sort of like a Gareth Bale situation where he comes back, 5, 6, 7 years later, whatever that is, probably in this case less than that, and plays more for an England club of any kind. That just wouldn't surprise me
Yeah.
at all. So, with that said, he wasn't actually the most uh, famous footballer to make a move this summer whatsoever. In fact, closer to home, Messi, Lionel Messi, the one and only, whose most notable club in his career has blocked you on Twitter. Is that true? FC.
Unblocked me. They did unblock me eventually, but it is,
Okay.
yeah, it's
So you
always a
can
good
say
story.
thanks to Elon for that, I guess. Um, but but Messi made his way to Miami, and there's been some talk about the future of American soccer as a result of Messi coming over here. And I know this is a massive question, so I'm going to try, and we're both sports management people,
Yeah.
so I'm going to try and keep it sort of away from the business side, because you and I both know, I think our
Sure.
listeners, I've talked about it before, it's a huge commercial effect. But in terms of like eyeballs on the league in a soccer perspective, if that makes sense, like the amount of people that are going to be interested in the MLS specifically, not just soccer in general, do you think it has as big of an impact as what's been made?
Yes, I do. I think it's lived up to everything that it could have been in the first couple months alone. When you look at not even the MLS, but like something like the League's Cup, which was the first competition he had that serious run in. I mean, that's a competition in its first year with virtually no eyes that no one really knows about. And it becomes like a kind of a cultural phenomenon over those few couple of weeks where it's like, when does Inter Miami play? The fact that he was able to do that in that quick of a period is just, it's insane. I mean, we see the ticket prices, what he's done to it. Like you said, it's an economic effect more than it is just on the field. And the fact that he's performing as well. He could have easily Steven Gerrard, my club legend, came to the MLS and kind of landed flat on his face. Messi's came and he's kind of shown out. I think he has 12 goals and 5 assists in like 10 games in all comps. Crazy. And as Inter Miami gets better too, if they're like fighting in the playoffs and making it like to late stages of these cups, that's going to be even better. And, I think Apple TV is going to see a lot of subscriptions as a result of
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, I mean, I was an Apple TV guy before, and ironically enough, you might think this is funny. I've still never seen Ted Lasso. Um,
Oh,
I like we stayed on Apple TV because of I don't know if do you have it?
I do.
Yeah, because we stayed and signed up for that Jennifer Aniston show about the news
The
or whatever.
morning show, yeah.
The morning show, great show. And then we also stayed because there was this funny comedy, British comedy actually called Trying, where the guy's actually a Spurs fan, so it's kind of funny. But I mean, people think that I have it because I Ted Lasso, and but I just I haven't seen Ted Lasso yet. Anyway, side note. But back to Messi. I agree with the assessment that it will help propel the country into the 26 World Cup. But I obviously that's a case because the more interest there is leading up, the better, right? Because they're always, as you and I have talked about before, there always sort of seems to be like a pickup and then a drop off. So I think if you can start the build, I know you're probably looking at me the other way, so I'll go this way. If you can start the build earlier, I think that's great. I guess my one pushback would be on that theory is like, do enough people turn the channel to the MLS, like hardcore, like you're a hardcore soccer person, right?
Yeah.
Like I don't know, would you turn the channel? I know you like, what is it, Minnesota United or whatever their name is?
Loosely, yeah.
Okay. Loosely, like, but that's the thing, like as much as you love soccer, your first love is the Premier League, and a lot of people, like new soccer fans, are going to realize, oh yeah, there's that out there too to watch and consume.
Yeah.
So as great as it is to propel the sport forward toward the 2026 World Cup, I would still push back and say the MLS is still going to have a hard time. Now, I think it's closer to MLB and NHL than a lot of people give it credit for. I don't think it will ever be NBA or NFL, but I think it is closer to the others. And with the whole Apple TV thing, that's a tough lift too. Much like I lamented the Peacock thing, I think the harder it is to watch a game logistically, I think that could be a tough ask, even if it is to see Messi. I think what they'll do better with is they'll do better. Like Miami's a slam dunk market. The amount of Latin American heritage folks who live down there, huge into soccer already. A lot of Argentinian Americans, Venezuelan Americans, Colombian Americans, Cuban Americans, people that love Mexican Americans, people that already love soccer to begin with. It's a slam dunk to have him there. What I'm more interested in from a soccer in America perspective with Messi is, what does he do to the guy like me who doesn't really watch the MLS? And frankly, like, how often is Inter Miami going to play the Revs? Pretend I was a Revs fan. I'm not. But like, you know what? They're going to play him like a couple times a year. I don't know. I'm skeptical on a few things, but I think by and large, it's going to be hard to ignore the economic impact, number one, and possibly the ramp up toward the World Cup.
Yeah, I agree with you on all those fronts. I'm not an MLS guy really, so I think where it has like the biggest impacts is like social and like worldwide following as well. Like there's gonna be people in England watching the MLS who like soccer, which we've never had before. And I agree with you that I don't know how much it does for like the US audience who doesn't watch soccer. The issue with it, and not to get too businessy, but they kind of like sold themselves short a little bit by giving him so much of a stake in like the Apple TV revenue. Now for like future guys, they're all going to want that cut or like something similar. And now they have like no pull to get future guys where like, Saudi Arabia is just pulling everybody. So yes. I think the MLS, like this was a little bit short-sighted. It's going to be a Pele 2.0 tour. It's going to have its limelight. Messi's going to make himself a whole nother level of celebrity. But in terms of the league growing, I don't know about that.
Right. I agree. I think it's great for the sport and the marketing of the sport, but not exactly great for the league itself. Like, I'm not running to turn on MLS because I know that Messi, as great as he is, and I'm not saying I believe this, I'm just sort of trying to think like an outsider here. He's still not like an American sports celebrity, so it's going to be really hard for people to like gravitate toward that. Whereas because the context they know him in is the World Cup, which he just won, and European soccer, which he's dominated. So it's like that's the context that they know him in. So it's going to be really hard to break that fourth wall, if you know
Yeah,
what I
of
mean.
course. And it's also hard for the MLS to, be this is crazy to say, but I think they're the second biggest soccer league in our country. I think the Premier League's bigger than the MLS
Oh,
in America.
absolutely. That's not a
So
crazy
it's
thing to
tough.
say. That's not a crazy thing to say. The difference is, and NBC owns the rights to the Premier League, and even though they got rid of their sports channel and are moving everything to streaming,
Yeah.
they're still NBC. Whereas to find MLS, it's either a local um, sports network, which by the way are dying. You know that, I know that,
Yeah.
or it's Apple TV Plus, which you have to pay for, which not a lot of people know exist. So yeah, that's a big ask. And that like the NBC carries the Olympics and the Premier League. You know what I mean? Like that's their thing. And Sunday Night Football, like that's their thing. They carry that torch. And they've done a really good job with their Premier League coverage. Their Premier League coverage is amazing. And so you're 100% right when you say it's like I don't see people gathering at the Portland Zoo or Gritty's to watch the MLS, but I see them going there for the Premier League. And speaking of that, I didn't even plan that segue. That was an amazing segue. I didn't even go to broadcasting school.
Great.
There's been some huge soccer news in our state in particular. I mentioned at the outset, and this is a good thing to close the show on. Mentioned at the outset that you're the host of the Maine Stand. You've been doing that for a few years now. You guys have really sort of ascended parallel to a movement that has brought successfully secured the rights to bring a USL franchise to Portland, Maine. So to my local listeners, if you could, please explain what the USL is and sort of the background of this new franchise, because you probably know a little bit more about it than me.
Yeah, and the American soccer pyramid. And I know a lot about this topic, to be fair. The first time I wrote about a potential USL one or a USL team coming to Portland was 4 years ago. I wrote an article in the Bangor Daily News, so it's been a long time in the works. But in the football pyramid in America, basically it's the MLS's top. Unlike, England and other leagues, there's not promotion and relegation, so teams are kind of static in these leagues. Under the MLS, it's the USL, which is almost like its own little pyramid. But we know it to be under the MLS in terms of, playing in cups and stuff like that. In the USL, there's three different leagues, sort of like minor league baseball. There's the USL Championship, League One, and League Two, labeled exactly like you would see in the Prem. And the USL is actually moving towards a promotion relegation system, which is going to be very interesting for the Portland team when they start playing, that there is going to be something on the line if you're not good, which just makes it all the more exciting, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
And MLS owners are never going to agree to that because it means that their, billion-dollar franchise has the potential to lose, mega TV rights and stuff like that. But that's kind of where the USL sits on the pyramid. So we would be in Portland, USL League One. So one level up from the bottom, one level below the top in the USL, two leagues below the MLS. It's a really exciting league. They score a lot of great goals. A lot of the players are, coming out of collegiate teams, Division I teams. So really good players. The talent level is pretty high for a semi-professional league. You're going to be playing teams kind of all over the Eastern Seaboard, teams like even going out to the Midwest, the Forward Madisons. There's a team coming to Brooklyn, I believe. So it's a lot of fun trips, I would say, as an away fan. It's just overall, it's just going to be so exciting. I don't know if you have any kind of follow-up questions for that we can touch on more.
No, I had heard that about the USL. I just didn't know if I was correct in my assumptions and wanted to make sure we set the record straight there. I did know that it was within its own little pyramid, for lack of a better term. I think it's great because because to be honest, Josh, I think that will do more than like Messi being on a streaming service personally. Because, you know, before we started recording, you mentioned that you work in Lewiston now. I live in a town next to Lewiston. I work in Lewiston. And even though Lewiston's an hour north of Portland, they have a tremendous soccer culture. I'd encourage you, if you haven't, to read the book One Goal by Amy Bass. It's about their 2015 state championship team, which I believe was when you won a state championship, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. So in a different part of the state, but still, that's a cool connection. But anyway, it was about like bringing like Somali immigrant population together with, you know, the local town over soccer is essentially the preface of the book. And I think if you expand that to the greater state, we have an amazing you know, diverse population in the state that is growing, that loves soccer. I think Tom Karen of Nesson has done a great job promoting it. I think the group, you know, led by Gabe Hoffman Johnson, has done a great job of promoting it and really making it community first. Because this sounds corny, but it low key reminds me of I have been watching the Wrexham documentary. Sort of the buzz and the fervor obviously will not be like Wrexham and, you know, Wales and how seriously they take football, but in terms of the unifying the community thing, I think that's going to be huge. I really do. All it takes is just, you know, one listen, you know, to you on Fridays with the Mannix guys, to know that, you know, they take it seriously. The media in Portland is invested. The city cares. They've done a lot of legwork. They have infrastructure in place. So I think like functionally it's going to be awesome. And then just from a fan's perspective, it's going to be one more thing to see when you're down there. Because, you know, Sea Dogs, we both know, we've worked there, have a great leg down in town. I think a lot of people were skeptical about the Mariners, but they've taken a step on another level the past few years. And now to have soccer, which you could say might be the second or third most popular sport statewide, I would say.
It would be up there. It fits so well with the culture here.
It does.
Especially from Lewiston down to Portland. I mean, you can go to the Portland Zoo on a 7:30 kickoff in the morning, and there'll be Spurs, Liverpool fans watching. You know, the soccer community is really built up. And the fact that they're just doing everything right with this, they've taken their time. And while that's made, you know, the kickoff date, you know, to 2025, they've really just taken their time and done everything right with this whole movement and initiative. They're building something not only around community, but around purpose, trying to actually like make an impact, not only to be a good soccer team, but to actually make like differences and footprints, you know, around the community. And they have all the right people involved. You know, if you don't know, they're doing town halls. I think the next one's October 14th. And, you know, they're having all of these really impressive people who have worked with not only American clubs, but big European clubs as well, working on this project. And they're really hearing what everyone has to say. It's not just old people sitting in the back of an office talking about what the branding is going to be like. They want to hear from everybody. It's truly Portland's team. It's not, you know, another Boston team. This is truly a team that's like owned in Maine, supported by everyone in Maine. It's really, really cool. Obviously, as someone, you know, who's a soccer fan who's been watching this since it kind of, I guess, was thought of, it's really cool to kind of see it being fulfilled.
Yeah, it's coming to fruition fast, and 2025 is going to go by really, really fast. Because I mean, the last team that we got in Maine, pro team, was the Mariners, and I remember like it was a slow, being a hockey guy, right? It was a slow build up to that, and you're like, okay, but like they wanted to learn from the mistakes that happened at the end of the Pirates situation. And I think like what they did is now they had to deal with COVID right in the middle, and now they had a bunch of sellouts last year. Pat Sullivan, shout out, sales guy Pat Sullivan, but like I hope he listens to the show. I don't know if he does. He might, but like they did everything right, and now like you go to that place in the first couple of years, it was really quiet. And like the third, fourth year, it's huge. I don't know if I think there might not be a phasing in period with the USL. Like there was a little bit of a phasing in period with the Mariners, the last team we got. I don't think there's going to be a phasing in period with the USL club, not with the amount, as you pointed out, of people down there that love it.
People are so ready, and it's a weird phenomenon because like you have all these people, we have basically supporter clubs for almost all top 6 teams in the Prem here in Portland, and people that, spend a ton of money on like, I mean, I spend a ton of money on Liverpool stuff, going to Liverpool every couple of years, all this stuff. And we've never had the opportunity to support local or have that passion walking to a match together, kind of like joining arms as like one color instead of some people wearing Man City jerseys, some people wearing Liverpool jerseys.
That's a good point.
Yeah, we're all going to come together, and it's like we're going to have our own songs, songs that were kind of made in Portland, flags, scarves. It's just, it feels like the anticipation is so big. I know it's just going to absolutely deliver for the city and the region.
Yeah. And this is actually a great segue to the end. 100% agree with you. We overuse the term grassroots, I think, in society, but this truly is that. And I don't think we've talked on air for sure, but we might have talked over text about it, but the event you guys helped out with and were part of during the World Cup at Monument Square was amazing. You guys did a great job with that. I watched that. I wanted to watch that game with my family, and I had the England game. I had my wife, my mom, my dad, my sister and brother-in-law showed up in the middle of it. And we're all just like glued. And it was kind of like a weird thing. And you'll probably appreciate this, being someone who grew to love the sport around your family too, is like explaining to my parents, who my mom could name probably every single Patriots player when I was a kid, right? Yeah. But like growing up around that, and then being able to explain to my mom, like, oh, like number 9 for England, like he plays for my favorite team, and that's who helped me. That's the athlete that I look at, who helped me get into the sport. If I was pointing to a specific athlete, or explaining the triangle thing, or like the pyramid thing to my parents, or watching We Are Wrexham with my wife, is like, these things are all really fun stuff, really fun things. And I think you guys with your podcast and USL of Portland with their grassroots movement, a true grassroots movement, have done a great job. So I can only commend you guys for doing that and putting in. I mean, we both know how much time you have to put into a podcast, into producing, into all that. So in how much work they put in, as you pointed out, to building the team. So it's something to celebrate. And I'll give you the last word, I guess.
Yeah, well, obviously, thank you. There's a lot of people outside of the podcast too, putting in huge amounts of grassroots effort. Kennedy Park FC. I could go on for hours of different little organizations in the community that are helping this movement for sure. It's been a long time coming, man. We put in the hours. We're trying to get people excited through media, through fan reactions, stuff like that. Just like anything any fan would like. We do that through the Prem, but we will be talking about the local team when they're around. We're excited to kind of help Gabe in any way to kind of build up that movement. I think we have in the past year, but we're going to keep doing that. Keep doing podcasts like yours and stuff like that. Really happy you had me on too. It was fun chatting about the Prem. It's always good to catch up about Liverpool Tottenham with you.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, who knows? Well, one thing's for certain, and I'll leave on a joke. There's not going to be a phantom call or no call on a Kane red card like there was in December 2021, because Kane isn't around to have a phantom red card possibility. So on that note, you might end up with a Christian Romero red card now that I just jinxed that.
Very good.
Yeah, well, I guess we'll probably chat via Instagram after the game, no matter what happens. But take care, Josh. And there's only one thing I have left to say. Come on, you Spurs. Thank you.